Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are undertaking what you might call a critical mission. We're going to take a really granular, unauthorized look at the corporate and cultural history of the Barbie brand. And you can forget the dream house fantasy for a moment, because we are heading straight into the high-security, almost riot-proofed boardroom reality of Mattel Incorporated.
That contrast is, I think, completely essential for this deep dive. We've compiled a fascinating stack of sources detailing Mattel's origins, their incredibly aggressive business tactics, pioneering, and, often very controversial marketing strategies.
Right.
And decades of just relentless legal warfare that utterly reshaped the modern toy industry. This isn't just a story about a doll. I mean, it's really the blueprint for building a self-replicating billion-dollar global empire.
An empire driven by what? Sheer force of will.
Sheer force of will, revolutionary advertising, and sometimes, let's be honest, corporate deception.
And to really get our heads around that empire, we have to start with its physical reality. We are not starting in Barbieland, but in El Segundo, California.
Right.
The name itself is so loaded, it translates to the second, which is a nod to the Standard Oil refinery that moved in over a century ago. And that refinery, it's now run by Chevron, and it's known for significant water pollution. It still takes up almost a third of the town.
It creates this perfect, almost dystopian setting. I mean, it really does. The ultimate fantasy product, the iconic blonde, this aspirational American idol, is designed and manufactured in a low-slung, concrete, deliberately nondescript business park.
Right next to a massive refinery.
Exactly, right next to a refinery known for environmental issues. And the buildings themselves, our sources say, they're riot-proofed, which, right away that just signals the level of secrecy and control Mattel insists upon.
And that secrecy, it seems to be pervasive. The author of our source material described multiple layers of, paranoia and high security just trying to gain entry. The Research and Development Center is ominously dubbed the Mattel Inc. Handler Team Center. That's one of the highest security buildings on the entire site. And furthermore, when the author reached out to former employees, they were met with just absolute silence. People
were scared.
Genuinely afraid to speak. They were citing binding exit packages or the specter of retaliation.
And that's the atmosphere they cultivated, The author eventually had to use an alias Anne and basically bluff her way past security. She found the experience less CIA than walking into an exclusive restaurant without a reservation.
Right.
But even once you're inside, the company used black room dividers, tight security, just to hide their internal gallery.
And this gallery is so key to their whole strategy. Mattel intentionally reduced its presence at major public trade fairs in New York, in Nuremberg. They didn't want their rivals to get even a tiny glimpse of their upcoming product line.
So instead of showing off, they went into lockdown.
Exactly. They shifted to these high-security, invite-only presentations right at the headquarters. They were isolating the competition and really establishing a pattern of operational secrecy that was foundational to how they managed their intellectual property for decades to come.
To trace this empire of control, we have to start with the handlers themselves in post-war Los Angeles. The central figure is absolutely Ruth Handler, born Moscow, which was short for Moscovich.
And what was she like?
She was, by all accounts, compact, tidy, highly pragmatic, and just incredibly risk-tolerant. There's this anecdote about her father dying at a card table, which kind of highlights this hereditary gambling streak that ran through her family.
A trait that would define Mattel's early business decisions, for sure.
Absolutely. And her husband, Elliot, originally named Izzy, he was her creative opposite. He was shy, less business-minded, obsessed with plastics, and originally he wanted to be a cartoonist.
So Ruth was the driver.
Oh, she was the undisputed driver, the one who navigated that tough, early entrepreneurial landscape. Our source even notes that she was the one who suggested Elliot adopt his middle name because she was worried that Izzy sounded so Jewish and might hinder their growth in mid-century America.
Wow. Right.
Their initial endeavors were, quintessential LA entrepreneurship. They started with a company called Elzac, which was Elliot and Zachary Zemby. Then they formed Mattel, combining Elliot's name with their brief partner, Harold Matson.
And Ruth had let's say, a low opinion of Matson.
She did. She dismissively called him a kind of stupid guy. Their first product was actually plastic picture frames, capitalizing on Los Angeles being acetate city at the time.
But the defining pivot, the accidental shift into toys that happened during World War II, right?
That's it. Plastic was restricted for military use, so it forced them to pivot to wood. They started making miniature doll furniture, and these were tables so tiny they would only fit a doll.
And that small, almost irrelevant product line.
It determined the entire multi-billion-dollar future of Mattel. It's incredible.
So let's fast forward to 1959 and the birth of Barbie, named after their daughter Barbara.
Though, hilariously, the daughter only got the nickname after the doll was created. It flips the typical narrative completely.
And the doll was engineered by Jack Ryan, a former missile engineer.
I mean, you can't get a better detail than that. His job was perfecting missiles and warheads for the military, and now he's perfecting patented, articulating doll hips.
The physical design details are just astonishing, and they really underscore the unnatural proportions. Barbie was made of vinyl, featuring a triangular torso, elliptical hips, and 2 pin gams.
And the attention to detail and the subsequent erasure of detail was so specific. When the demo models arrived from Japan, they had delineated nipples.
And
Ryan manually filed off her areolas. He made sure the doll was perpetually smooth and prepubescent.
Her breasts were described as perfect hemispheres unmoved by gravity. And her feet, this is critical, her feet were permanently arched for stilettos.
Right. They were so slanted that she couldn't stand on her own. She was built with pre-drilled holes in her soles so she could be, and this is a quote, speared onto a stand.
Her very design confirmed that she was meant to be posed in high heels or perpetually supported. It just reinforces the highly artificial, fashion-centric nature of the product from day one.
And her debut was this dramatic affair, March 1959, at the New Yorker Hotel, a formerly glamorous spot that's now, interestingly, partially owned by the Unification Church, or the Moonies.
She was positioned in these elaborate dioramas, modeling the iconic original zebra-striped bathing suit and the elegant gay Parisienne taffeta gown. And even that very first batch of dolls, blondes already outnumbered brunettes 2-1.
It cemented her identity as the ideal American blonde right out of the gate.
But we cannot discuss Barbie without addressing the elephant in the room.
The German pinup.
Bill Lilly. She was the actual source of inspiration, although Mattel aggressively tried to minimize or even just deny this fact for decades.
And Lily's origins are fascinating because they are the complete opposite of Barbie's aspirational image. She was sketched by Reinhard Buthian in 1952, not as a toy, but just to fill a literal blank space in the German tabloid Bild-Zeitung.
And this newspaper, it wasn't exactly highbrow.
No. It was founded by Axel Springer, a staunchly pro-austerity right-wing nationalist who openly stated his readers didn't want to think deeply.
So Lily was designed for that reader.
Exactly. She was a sexier version of a British comic pinup named Jane, who was known for her continuous wardrobe malfunctions. Lily's persona was the ultimate woman-child fantasy. She was defined by flouting dress codes, pursuing rich men, and offering cynical commentary.
Her debut caption was brazen. Do you know the name and address of a tall, beautiful, rich man?
Right. Readers didn't focus on the news. They focused on what Lily said today.
And the doll itself was purely a marketing strategy for the newspaper. And she was manufactured by O&M Hauser, a company disturbingly known for producing elastomeric toy soldiers.
Including Nazi figures.
Yeah. And despite her overtly sexy pinup origins, they took precautions to maintain a non-pornographic image. Her legs were molded together so she keeps her legs together when she sits.
It's just wild. She was a symbol of consumer culture and was even used in West Germany for propagandistic activity.
So the corporate history here is pretty clear. Ruth Handler's famous anecdote of seeing Lily in a Swiss toy shop window. It's highly suspicious.
Most industry insiders believe the handlers saw her at the Nuremberg Toy Fair, where she was already a known commodity. And Mattel's actions after Barbie launched just confirmed their awareness.
They acted with typical Mattel speed and secrecy. They immediately hired a guy named Paul Guggenheim, a Swiss toy man who had successfully distributed Lily abroad, and they put him in charge of setting up Mattel International.
Then, in 1964, after securing their own international distribution for Barbie, Mattel just acquired the worldwide rights to Lily directly from the Hausers.
A quiet acquisition.
It was a corporate masterstroke. It eliminated the German legal challenge, sure, but more importantly, it allowed Mattel to control the narrative. By purchasing the antecedent, they effectively erased the true origin story.
And they minimized the uncomfortable fact that the wholesome, aspirational American doll was a direct copy of a raunchy, gold-digging German pinup intended for a right-wing tabloid audience.
It's the first major instance we see of Mattel eliminating a competitive threat and then completely rewriting history.
And that pattern of aggression, it only intensified as Mattel grew. In the mid-1950s, if you wanted to become a major player in the toy industry, you had to challenge one man, Louis Marks.
Louis Marks and Company. He monopolized 10% of U.S. toy sales and was famously called the Henry Ford of the toy industry.
What was his philosophy?
It was built on rigidity and efficiency. Cut costs, automate mass production, and absolutely avoid expensive advertising. He proudly boasted of spending a paltry $312 on advertising in 1955.
$312.
Right. He believed, fundamentally, if a toy couldn't make it on its own, he got rid of it. He saw marketing manipulation as unnecessary, even distasteful.
But Mattel, headquartered in LA, the center of American visual culture, they realized that Marx was operating in the past. They sensed the country was rapidly entering a visual electronic age.
And they made the radical decision to bypass the parents, who were the purchasers, and go directly to the consumer, the child.
Which led to the famous massive corporate gamble. In 1954, Mattel, whose net worth was only $500,000, committed their entire fortune to sponsoring 15 minutes of airtime weekly on Disney's The Mickey Mouse Club. And critically, they signed a contract that was year-round and non-cancelable.
Their controller, a man named Yasuo Yoshida, warned Ruth Handler that if this contract failed, they wouldn't just go broke. He said they would be badly bent.
They were risking financial suicide on the premise that advertising directly to children would force their parents to spend money.
And the gamble paid off spectacularly. Mattel pioneered direct-to-child marketing, and they fundamentally changed the toy industry forever. Louis Marks was forced to reverse his decades-long strategy.
He started frantically copying them.
Frantically. He started sponsoring programs like Howdy Doody and Captain Kangaroo. He announced a costly saturation campaign, but the pioneering advantage was lost.
Mattel just cemented their new role. They even responded by sponsoring Maddie's Fun Day Funnies, where they coyly called Maddie Mattel the king of toys.
A clear signal that they had usurped the throne.
But the advertising breakthrough, that only solved one half of the equation, right? Reaching the kids. Barbie still had a huge parent problem.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the conversation gets truly weird.
Yeah.
They brought in the Freud of Madison Avenue, Ernest Dichter, and his technique of motivational research.
Dichter's influence cannot be overstated. He was an Austrian psychologist who studied under Freud's protégés and even ran his early practice on Freud Street in Vienna. His whole methodology involved linking commercial products to these deep-seated, often subconscious human desires and insecurities.
And his findings were pretty outlandish, but highly influential. He argued that different car models served as either a mistress or a wife.
He claimed that smoking a cigarette was comparable to sucking at the nipples of a gigantic world breast.
And get this, our source mentions a personal anecdote about him claiming to experience an erection from killing chickens. This is the man Mattel hired to analyze children's toys.
That's the guy. Critics like Vance Packard, who wrote The Hidden Persuaders, they saw Dichter as a proponent of mass manipulation. They suggested he was trying to turn the American mind into catatonic dough, but Mattel needed his help desperately.
So they commissioned a $12,000 Dichter study on controversial toys, specifically focusing on Barbie. What did he find?
The core issue was that parents, especially upper-middle-class mothers, who were the target demographic for all the expensive accessories, they found the doll too sexy.
Uncomfortable.
Profoundly uncomfortable. They reacted by citing outfits like the sheer pink negligee and calling them daddy dolls. The source notes one mother was so embarrassed she was actually blushing. This threatened Mattel's entire investment.
So how did Dichter spin adult sexuality into a child's aspiration?
This was the true breakthrough. Dichter determined that the clothes sell the doll. He argued that a mother's initial embarrassment it dissolved when she saw the elaborate wardrobe, the endless opportunities for fashion, and the concept of aspirational careers.
So mothers changed their minds because they believed the doll would encourage good habits of self-grooming.
And promote sophisticated fantasy rather than just raw sexuality.
That is a brilliant pivot. It means the sexiness wasn't a deal breaker, not when it was packaged with dress-up opportunity. They could embrace the adult proportions while marketing the fantasy of career and fashion.
Precisely. And the single psychological insight validated Mattel's entire long-term high-profit strategy. They adopted the razor blade model of toys, adapted from King Camp Gillette.
Sell the razor cheap.
Or the doll body at a manageable price and profit exponentially on the blades, which are all the expensive, aspirational accessories.
Barbie, therefore, became a merchandiser's dream. She generated a continuous fire hose of goods. Bubble baths, diaries, cars, lockets, comic books, tea sets, everything you could imagine.
Ruth Handler was right to proclaim, the name Barbie is magic. It was a magic built on Freudian analysis and merchandising. #tag3 corporate culture, credit wars, and the financial collapse.
So while Ruth Handler was masterminding this marketing strategy, the man who actually patented the doll's design, Jack Ryan, was living a life of utter chaos and extravagance.
And it was all funded entirely by Mattel's success.
And his financial arrangement made this possible. He wasn't an employee, he was an independent contractor paid in royalties per patent. As Mattel sales skyrocketed, Ryan's personal wealth just exploded. He was paid $1.5 million in 1965 alone.
His lifestyle was straight out of a Hollywood movie. I mean, Ryan bought this massive Bel Air estate with a moat, a working wooden drawbridge, 7 kitchens, and a secret stairwell.
He even hired a rotating staff of UCLA frat guys, Ryan's boys, to wear custom police costumes and tend the grounds. The man drove an operative fire engine party bus.
It sounds less like a toy designer's home and more like a James Bond villain's lair sponsored by a fraternity.
And his parties were legendary. He hosted 150 parties a year, notorious for naked women and general chaos. There's this infamous incident where a Lady Godiva impersonator's horse knocked over a drink table, revealing that bare horsehair and bare bottoms don't mix.
The absurdity of it all was a huge PR problem for the handlers, and it just exacerbated an already deep professional rift. Ryan insisted his name appear as the originator on nearly every Mattel patent because of his complex payment scheme.
And Ruth publicly dismissed him. She said he couldn't think of anything original.
Which, coming from the woman who copied Lily is just rich with irony.
The war of images escalated. Ryan hired Russell Birdwell, the high-profile publicist behind Gone with the Wind. This led to an Esquire profile that completely marginalized the handlers, referring to them only as the couple. This all culminated in Ryan suing Mattel for $24 million, claiming he was shortchanged on royalties.
And Mattel's cold strategy was to just try and drag the case out, betting that Ryan would exhaust his wealth on legal fees.
And while this legal battle was consuming the company, Mattel faced another critical design crisis: the request for a boyfriend doll.
Ken. Consumers were demanding Ken, but Mattel was scared to death of boy dolls. They feared they couldn't control the narrative the way they could with Barbie.
But they debuted him in 1961. The internal debate over his anatomy, though, was surprisingly serious. The VPs, they wanted a permanent swimsuit painted on.
Right, but the designer, Charlotte Johnson, warned them that kids would immediately scratch that paint off to see what's under it.
And Dichter's earlier research on realism suggested kids expected some detail. They expected some anatomical representation.
So the compromise was a permanent set of jockey shorts and a subtle lump. However, when the final molds went to Japan, the engineering supervisor just arbitrarily eliminated both the lump and the shorts design.
For what reason?
To save 1.5 cents worth of plastic per doll.
1.5 cents determined the anatomy of the world's most famous male doll.
That is the ultimate arbiter in corporate design. Profit, down to the fraction of a cent. Ken debuted as smooth and commando. Ruth Handler found the doll very unrealistic and later lamented that she never forgave those people for that design compromise.
And that cheap compromise, it perfectly foreshadows the massive, unchecked corporate expansion that followed. Mattel's growth was dizzying. They went from $100 million in sales to $200 million in just 3 years after going public in 1960.
And that rapid expansion led to immense stock market pressure. To smooth out volatile seasonal sales, Mattel tried these desperate, sometimes ridiculous measures like the attempt to market MAOGC.
The Mattel All-Occasion Gift Center.
They called the acronym MAGIC, but you're right, it was a sign of desperation to force sales outside of the Christmas season.
They also launched aggressive trade-in promotions, like the Twist and Turn Barbie. Ruth Handler later boasted that this resulted in more Barbie dolls traded in this country than automobiles.
They were creating artificial demand cycles just to satisfy the market's insatiable hunger for growth.
So to manage this chaos, Ruth brought in Seymour Rosenberg, a former Hughes and Litton executive.
And she immediately distrusted him. She called him adult Eddie Haskell. But she needed a numbers guy. Rosenberg quickly asserted his dominance, allegedly insulting Ruth based on her gender and Jewish background. He told her, "You're a woman, you're Jewish, and your style is all wrong for dealing with the powerful investment community."
And under Rosenberg, Mattel went on an aggressive, reckless acquisition binge. They bought non-toy companies in what they termed the world of the young.
Right, things like Metaframe, which made home aquariums, playground equipment, and even the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus.
And critically, these acquisitions were paid for largely with stock, which required Mattel to maintain artificially inflated stock prices and report consistent, spectacular gains.
The entire house of cards began to collapse around 1970, and this coincided with Ruth Handler's profound personal crisis. Following a diagnosis, she underwent a modified radical mastectomy, which left her with permanent nerve damage and caused intense psychological distress.
She said she felt dewomanized.
She entered a period she called Mrs. Invisible, struggling to return to the office she once dominated.
And in her absence, the young tigers, her aggressive deputies, they ran wild. The pressure to meet these inflated stock expectations led to outright fraud. Executives, including Bernie Loomis, implemented the bill and hold technique.
And we need to pause here and clearly define that, because this is how the fraud happened. Bill and hold is a fraudulent accounting practice where a company recognizes revenue before the goods have even been shipped or paid for.
So Mattel would invoice retailers for massive shipments of toys.
Right. They'd record the sales completed, but they'd hold the product in their own warehouse, agreeing that the retailer didn't have to pay until much later, maybe even the next quarter.
And this manufactured over $13 million in fictitious sales. It made them look wildly profitable when the goods hadn't actually left their control.
It was a classic case of inflating stock value for acquisition purposes. When the financial situation became utterly untenable, Ruth was forced to resign in 1973. The SEC charged both her and Rosenberg in 1974 with employing devices, schemes, and artifices to defraud the public for over 2 years.
And the damning evidence came from her former controller, Yasuo Yoshida.
He testified under oath that in 1972, Ruth herself had ordered him to purge the file of all the incriminating bill and hold documents. This directly implicated her in the cover-up.
The final legal maneuver happened in December 1978. Ruth and Rosenberg pleaded nolo contendere.
No contest, which means the defendant accepts the punishment imposed by the court without formally admitting guilt. It was a strategic move to limit their exposure to subsequent civil lawsuits from shareholders.
And the judge, Robert Takasugi, did not mince words. He called their crimes exploitative, parasitic, and disgraceful.
They received the maximum sentence of 41 years, but it was immediately suspended. They were sentenced to 5 years probation and a $57,000 fine.
And in a final act of corporate chutzpah, Ruth brazenly tried to deduct that $57,000 fine as a business expense.
Incredible. Following her disgrace and her period of Mrs. Invisible, which included extensive gambling at Gardena casinos, Ruth Handler eventually channeled her trauma back into business. She started a company called Ruthton, where she created post-mastectomy prosthetics called Nearly Me.
So she leveraged the health crisis that had indirectly contributed to her corporate downfall.
Exactly. #Tech40. The cultural wars in corporate mimicry.
So as Mattel is navigating this SEC scandal and the post-Handler era, Barbie herself remains this magnetic figure for cultural debate. She became the perfect figurehead for the national discourse on womanhood during the second wave of feminism.
Absolutely. The critical lens focused heavily on Dictor's role. Betty Friedan in The Feminine Mystique, she devoted an entire chapter to Dictor, the manipulator.
And what was her argument?
She argued that Dictor and his peers successfully redirected the creative energies of educated housewives away from meaningful careers and toward the relentless, mindless accumulation of goods and accessories.
And Barbie, the accessory queen, was right in the crosshairs. Critics called her the archetype of everything that's wrong with American culture, describing her as a craven, pornographic, lascivious idol.
The doll designed to encourage good habits was now seen as shaping the coming generation towards superficiality. It proved Mattel's pioneering marketing was a real double-edged sword.
Meanwhile, Mattel had to cautiously address the issue of race, a conversation that was forced partly by the Watts riots near their headquarters in 1965.
Right, that increased the pressure on corporations to engage in some kind of civic responsibility.
But their initial attempts were disastrous. In 1967, they released Colored Francie, a black doll inserted into the Barbie line. But she was universally criticized for using Caucasian features and, well, the outdated terminology, colored.
She failed on all counts. She struggled to sell to white consumers who may have reacted poorly to the implication of miscegenation, and she failed to sell to black consumers who saw her as a completely inauthentic representation.
This failure led to a fascinating corporate maneuver, Operation Bootstrap. In 1968, Mattel financed this black-owned company in Watts. And the move served two purposes, right? It helped them avoid government job training programs.
And it gave them invaluable authentic market research. Operation Bootstrap's subsidiary, Shindana, produced Baby Nancy, the first truly ethnically correct black doll.
And to do this, Shindana had to invent a major manufacturing innovation. They figured out how to create natural-looking hair texture by sewing plastic hair onto the doll's head and then sticking it in an oven to crinkle.
They also solved a technical problem. They developed a dye that was mixed directly into the plastic that prevented the doll from fading into a dull gray, which was a huge issue with previous attempts at mass-market black dolls.
And Mattel recognized the genius of this technique. They later adopted it for subsequent dolls like Christie. Ruth Handler, still highly secretive, only scrolled on one memo. Shindana is the company of black ghetto people that we helped form after the Watts riots.
And this strategy of observation, mimicry, and flanking competitors was just deeply ingrained in Mattel's DNA. It was a skill they perfected after observing Louis Marx's rigid failures. They became masters of flanking warfare.
The speed of their reaction was often the key. A great example is the 1985 Rockers race. Mattel learned that Hasbro was developing a rock star doll named Gem. So Mattel's team, the Pink Berets, assembled a war council. They commissioned music from disco producer Giorgio Moroder, and they launched Barbie and the Rockers in just 4 months.
They beat Gem to market, and Hasbro made a crucial tactical error. They designed Gem an inch taller, which required proprietary and more expensive clothes.
And Mattel immediately undercut the price,
causing Gem to glitch out and fail after only 2 years.
This drive to create toys that were perfectly integrated into other media, it led to the coining of the term toyetic.
Right. Concepts or characters that easily translate into toys. And this led to the inversion of the model, launching shows based on toys, like the Hot Wheels cartoon in 1969. The FCC quickly filed complaints about this, arguing it blurred the line between programming and pure advertising.
As the decade turned, under CEO Jill Barad, Mattel entered a new, far more aggressive phase of litigation. The goal was to achieve a virtual monopoly on Barbie's public image,
which earned them the nickname intellectual property bully.
This culminated in the famous Barbie Girl lawsuit against the band Aqua. Mattel tried to legally suppress the satire, arguing it was gimmickry and libelous, trying to divorce their wholesome corporate image from the public's perception of Barbie as a bimbo consumerism symbol.
And although that case was famous, the real legal tightening came from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge Alex Kaczynski ruled in an earlier case that to merit copyright protection, a feature need not be particularly novel or unusual. It only had to reflect a minimal degree of creativity.
And this subtle shift made it exponentially easier for Mattel to target seemingly minor variations and enforce their control.
And they targeted everyone. They censored fan art and parodies online, anything from Hacker Barb to distorted Barbie. They went after physical parodies like Paul Hanson's Drag Queen Barbie and Trailer Trash Barbie,
demanding $1.2 billion in damages from Hanson, who sold them for only about $2,000 total.
These cases were widely understood to be designed to squash, not to be won. Mattel often settled or lost on the legal merits, but the sheer financial cost of litigation forcing artists to pay default judgments after missing hearings, that was enough to secure compliance and maintain their iron grip on the doll's image. #TagV, the Bratz saga, and corporate espionage.
This brings us to the ultimate existential threat to the Barbie empire, Bratz. Debuting in 2001 from MGA Entertainment, Bratz challenged Barbie's blank, unblemished ideal with an edgier, chicks with attitude look, big heads, pouty lips, and a genuine embrace of diversity.
And the Bratz line immediately challenged Barbie's dominance. The CEO of MGA Entertainment, Isaac Lorian, was this charismatic, passionate, Persian Jewish immigrant who started his career as a dishwasher. He finally delivered the product requested by a Walmart buyer. Bring me something that competes with Barbie.
The key designer was Carter Bryant, a former Mattel designer who had resigned in 1998, and Mattel's entire legal case hinged on the claim that he conceived the dolls while he was still on their payroll.
Bryant insisted he conceived the design while he was working at an Old Navy in Missouri, inspired by diverse, fashionable high school girls he saw there.
Bratz's success sent Mattel into a full-scale corporate panic. The CEO, Robert Eckert, a state executive known previously for marketing salad dressing and wieners at Oscar Mayer, he received an anonymous letter.
The letter claimed Bryant developed Bratz while still at Mattel, bound by a contract giving Mattel ownership of his inventions. This letter was the fuse.
And this is where the corporate espionage kicks in, reaching truly absurd levels of paranoia and organized misconduct. Mattel operated a specific internal unit, the Market Intelligence Department.
Run by Sal Villaseñor, and they were actively involved in corporate spying.
Our sources confirm Villaseñor operated under an internal playbook, the infamous How to Steal Manual,
which detailed best practices for infiltrating competitor trade fairs, including using fake identities like posing as a buyer or the press, such as the editor of the daily 49er newspaper at Cal State Long Beach.
The manual even specified using custom briefcases designed to steal competitor information. And crucially, Mattel sanctioned this activity by rewarding Villaseñor with performance bonuses based on the intelligence he gathered.
This was not rogue behavior, this was systematic.
And Mattel's lawyers also engaged in highly questionable tactics, including a secret document sharing agreement with an accused counterfeiter, City World, to gather intelligence against MGA. Eckert double-deleted his emails, and Mattel went as far as staking out Lorien's headquarters.
The internal culture was described as intensely restrictive. Lawyers asserted, they own your voicemails, cameras are on you all the time.
The Bratz trial, the two big kahunas, it became a massive spectacle. Mattel's lawyers, Quinn Emanuel, claimed Bryant lied about the Missouri inspiration, arguing the concept was born at Mattel and pointing to Bryant's initial prototype, which is Frankenstein from old Mattel parts found in the trash.
MGA's defense lawyer, Jennifer Keller, fought back brilliantly. She reframed Lorien as this passionate, funny guy who built his empire from the bottom up. She accused Mattel of being a creepy corporation engaged in anti-competitive bullying and running the most elaborate and sophisticated and intrusive investigation apparatus.
Despite her defense, the jury initially sided with Mattel, granting them ownership of the entire Bratz line. But the most critical moment came on appeal from the Ninth Circuit.
Right. Judge Alex Kaczynski, the same judge who handled the Barbie girl case and was known for his eccentric libertarian rulings, he overturned the initial Mattel victory.
And he found Mattel was a corporate bully that had routinely stolen ideas, referencing the Lily theft, and was now attempting to achieve a monopoly on an unoriginal idea, the feminine ideal.
He used incredibly strong language, comparing Mattel's relentless attempt at total IP control to the kind of censorship an Ayn Rand total control freak might employ. This was a massive legal repudiation.
And the final financial outcome was staggering. Mattel's failure to settle and its aggressive years-long litigation cost the company an estimated $400 million.
Yielding zero return. The trial exposed Mattel's internal culture and confirmed the suspicion that in their corporate quest for total control, they were willing to engage in espionage and highly deceptive tactics.
Before we wrap up this corporate saga, we have to look at Barbie's cultural footprint after all this chaos. Because on one hand, she achieved this cult status among collectors, becoming a revered object.
Collecting became a massive market. Clubs started forming as early as 1969, leading to key resources like the Collector's Encyclopedia of Barbie Dolls, often called the Barbie Bible.
And Mattel eventually embraced this. They recognized the market potential netting $220 million by 1996, and they started hosting conventions and granting licenses.
And her acceptance into high culture cemented her status. Andy Warhol painted a portrait of Barbie at the request of a collector named Billy Boy. Warhol famously claimed, "Barbie, c'est moi," reinforcing this idea of the doll as a cultural canvas, a mirror reflecting society's aspirations.
So Barbie's survival, despite all the corporate turmoil and criticism, it relied on her essential mutability, her Zelig-like ability to absorb and reflect the world.
She could be President Bobby one year and an astronaut the next.
But Mattel fought relentlessly to ensure she remained blank and unblemished. They maintained that Barbie should never be attached to any specific flawed story. That's why they famously rejected Sharon Stone's pitch for a movie and barred her appearance in the original Toy Story.
They feared that a live-action adaptation risked associating the doll with sickness or scandal. Control was paramount.
And this brings us to the ultimate cultural paradox, highlighted by a study from the University of Bath in 2006, which had the rather pointed title, "The Simpsons are cool, but Barbie's a minger."
The study found that children, constantly saturated by commercial media, viewed Barbie as passé. She was a last resort option and a really bad classic.
So what was the most imaginative form of play they associated with her?
Mutilation. They engaged in elaborate destruction rituals, expressing their creativity by torturing and mutilating the dolls, snapping, melting, burning, pulling their heads off.
One child chillingly confessed, "I still have loads of them, so I can torture them. They're not particularly cool unless I torture them."
And the researchers drew a profound conclusion from this. Since Barbie always existed in the plural, you have a box of Barbies. Mutilating them was not cruelty to an individual. It was simply imaginative in disposing of an excessive commodity.
They were disposable. It's that needed to be destroyed to facilitate imaginative play.
The entire story of Mattel is one of relentless pursuit of market dominance, employing pioneering TV advertising, quasi-Freudian analysis, financial fraud, corporate espionage, and constant legal warfare. Barbie's longevity is tied both to her blank mutability and Mattel's iron-fisted, decades-long control over her image.
We've tracked this journey from miniature wood furniture and a German pinup through Ruth Handler's genius and subsequent disgrace, the sheer extravagance of Jack Ryan's chaotic Bel Air castle, the ruthlessness of the Bratz War, and all that corporate espionage. The ambition and the drive for corporate dominance were always as dramatic as the doll's fictional life.
And the ultimate irony is that the doll was intentionally designed to be an empty canvas, to be blank, so that girls could project their fantasies onto her. Yet Mattel fought tooth and nail for decades to ensure that only the sanctioned, unblemished, and highly profitable fantasy could exist.
Now for our final provocative thought. The source material notes that Mattel eventually learned to live with criticism, often finding ways to sell it as just another accessory. So considering Mattel's long documented history of corporate espionage, deception, and viewing every interaction as transactional, from the 1.5-cent Ken Bulge to the Lily theft to the $400 million Bratz War, is it possible that the chaotic, self-destructive impulse children exhibit toward the doll, the torturing and burning, is now simply the ultimate act of consumer engagement Mattel has learned to monetize?
Does the very act of rejection and destruction, the disposal of the excessive commodity, simply become the last, most intense accessory of the Barbie experience? An accessory that the company, in its endless quest for monetization and control, has finally figured out how to capture.
Something to mull over the next time you see a neon pink step and repeat. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.